to part 3 of the art of bonsai. In our first 2 episodes, we discussed repotting bonsai trees, and in the second episode, repotting a 5-tree Japanese maple forest. Today we're going to talk about something a lot more basic. It's troubled me over the years that many people find bonsai cultivation a mystery and a difficult thing to do. The reason this troubles me is that I found that cultivating bonsai should be one of the easiest of all the horticultural art forms. The reason for that is that trees are inherently strong and have a great will to survive. The problem is that most people tend to treat them as houseplants. And this is one of the things that we'd like to talk about, the differences between bonsai and houseplants and some of the things that bonsai trees need. The first and most critical factor is watering. With most houseplants, watering once a week is usually sufficient. With a bonsai tree, this is an invitation to sure death. We've seen it time and time again. People come in with trees that are dry, where the roots are totally destroyed, and it's from improper watering. One of the things that we tend to tell people, and it's a really good rule to remember, is when in doubt, water. Most bonsai trees at most times of the year should be watered every other day. There are factors that will affect this. From spring to fall, more frequent watering is necessary. The reasons for this are that with the stronger angle of the sun and the greater heat in the air, more moisture is absorbed out of the soil. In addition to that, the tree is in full growth, and that takes water out of the soil. So many trees that need watering every other day through most parts of the year need watering on a daily basis. Now, those of you who are familiar with raising houseplants may say, water on a daily basis, I'll rot the roots. On a houseplant, true. On a bonsai, not true. Just as an example, this dwarf Japanese juniper is in a container about 5 or 6 inches by about 3 to 4 inches by roughly 2 inches deep. A tree like this, again, should be watered every other day during cooler times of the year. Also during the summer on a cool day or on a rainy day, you can water it every other day. But during hot, drier weather, this should be watered every single day. The proper way to water a bonsai tree, it's very simple. There's no guesswork involved. You sit the tree in a pan or a bowl of water. Go right up to the rim of the pot. Don't go any deeper than that, because while some dealers advise soaking the tree to the trunk, this really doesn't accomplish anything except erode the soil. It carries away pieces of moss, dirt, and other things. It's better to go right up to the rim of the pot. The reason that that works well is that all bonsai pots have holes in the bottom. The water will rise in and seek its own level. If the tree is in water up to the rim, the water will rise to that level and thoroughly saturate the soil. The proper amount of time for a tree this size is anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. The drier the soil, the longer you want to leave it. If you were to leave a tree like this in even for an hour and do that every other day or even every day, you're still not going to hurt it. Please believe me, bonsai trees will not rot their roots if you water them in this manner. There is one thing that you do have to be careful about. What we recommend is that you keep the tree on a tray with some gravel on it, and that you keep water in the tray. It's important that the water not touch the bottom of the pot. Pile your gravel high. If you see water showing through on the top of the gravel, pour some of it out. You want the water to be below the gravel level, not touching the bottom. If you notice, there are little legs here on the bottom of this pot. Now, all bonsai pots share that one thing in common, very tiny little legs. The reason for those legs are to provide an air space between the drain holes and the surface that the tree is resting on. This is an example of an overfilled tray. As you can see, the water is above the top of the gravel, and when the pot is placed into it, the water will be touching the bottom of the pot. That's going to cause a problem with the roots eventually rotting because of improper drainage on the pot. The ideal level on something like this is right about like this. You want the tray to be approximately half filled with water so that you get good evaporation, but you shouldn't be able to see the water showing through the gravel. Now, as far as watering the tree goes, again, we place it into the basin, up to the rim of the pot. It should be just so deep. By placing the pot in water up to this level, you'll get proper penetration and no erosion of the soil surface. Once the tree has become totally saturated in 10 or 15 minutes, you remove it from the water, place it back on the tray, and the little bit of water that does drip out will replenish the water level in the tray. Again, keep an eye on it. If you find that it does get overfilled, you could simply spill a little bit of the water out of the tray. You want the tray approximately half full of water. That's going to solve one of the major problems that most people have with bonsai trees. The second problem, and again one of the most common ones, is that people are afraid to put a bonsai tree into the sun. We hear comments often of, "Oh, it's so little, how can it tolerate direct sun?" Again, think about what you're dealing with. We're talking about a tree. The fact that it's smaller, the fact that it's being grown in a miniaturized environment has absolutely no bearing on the fact that it is a tree. A puppy is still a dog, a kitten is still a cat. A bonsai is still a tree. Even though it's small, it needs everything that its full-grown counterpart would require. The minimum amount of sun for most bonsai trees is 2 hours. Many trees need a minimum of 3 to 4 hours. Again, as a rule of thumb, 2 to 3 hours of direct sun would be fine for most trees. It's really important, though, that the tree get direct sun. Again, remember, you're not dealing with a house plant. This is a tree, and if you doubt the requirements, walk outside your house and look around. You will not find any trees growing in a shady area, or at least not an area that's shaded all day. Sunlight is an absolute requirement. Now, one of the third problems, and I'm trying to give these to you in the order of importance and the frequency that we encounter them. Insect control is really important on bonsai trees that are being kept indoors. Now, this sounds like a contradiction. Most people believe that when a tree is outdoors, it's going to be prone to insect damage. When it's indoors, it's not going to be prone to insect damage. This is absolutely reverse of the reality of the situation. The reason for that is very simple when you think about it. A tree that's kept out of doors is very susceptible to infestation by predatory insects, insects that live on trees. Things such as spider mites, scale, aphids, mealybugs, things of that nature, things that do feed off of trees. However, these insects are just part of the food chain. They are food for different types of predatory insects, carnivorous insects, like spiders, praying mantises, ladybugs, and in addition to the predatory insects, there are a lot of natural factors that keep them under control. Wind, rain, sunshine, very natural, normal things, but to a little tiny insect, one that's so small, by the way, they're called microscopic for a reason. You can very rarely see them with the naked eye unless you've got really good eyesight. You need at least a magnifying glass and at best a microscope in order to tell what the status is on your bonsai tree, whether there is a presence of predatory insects on your tree. The outdoor environment will provide its own protection. Again, we have the predatory insects which will eat the tree inhabiting insects, and in addition to that, a raindrop is huge compared to a little mite or a little aphid, and when it rains on a tree out of doors, this will wash most of the insects off the tree. Not all, but most of them. It'll help keep them under control. In addition to that, the sunlight is very strong and drying for insects, so they'll usually leave the tree and go into the ground when they're exposed to strong sunlight. Wind will sometimes blow them away or at least make it more difficult for them to stay put. So what you'll have in nature is you may have a presence of insects, of harmful insects, but you'll very rarely get a really huge infestation. When you have a tree indoors, it's a little less probable that harmful insects will get on it. But once they do, there's virtually nothing to keep them under control. They have nothing to do but eat and breed all day, and before you know it, you get a really large presence of harmful insects on the tree, and they start doing some severe damage. In order to keep this under control, it's a good idea, whether the tree is being kept indoors or outdoors, to give it a monthly spray with a general all-purpose pesticide. There are many types of pesticides of many different strengths. We recommend spraying on a monthly basis with a mild pesticide. If it's done on a regular basis and if there's no serious infestation, then this is usually adequate. Again, milder pesticides are safer for the tree, they're safer for the environment, and this is not a bad thing. Another of the problems that many beginners have is determining the winter care of their bonsai trees. Bonsai trees basically break into two main groups, temperate and subtropical or tropical species. Trees from a cold climate, an area like the northeast New York or any of the northern areas, are temperate trees. Trees from a climate like Florida, the southern parts of Texas, southern California, vary anywhere from subtropical to tropical types. Now, one of the reasons that this is important is that a temperate climate tree must have cold during the winter months. A subtropical tree must have room temperatures, anywhere from cool to room temperatures. And you can't always tell just by looking at them. I want to give you an example of that. This is a tree in the acacia family. Now, you may look at this and think in terms of the mimosa tree. You wouldn't be far from wrong, but you would be wrong, and wrong to an extent that could be fatal to this tree on winter care. This is in reality a Samoa. A Samoa is in the same family as the mimosa, the acacia family. The wood looks virtually the same. The leaves looked almost exactly the same. As a matter of fact, if you notice, the leaves are all folded up and closed right now, the way a mimosa does. When this tree was brought in out of the sunlight, the leaves almost immediately began to close. It also makes very, very similar flowers, red in color, so from almost all, and by the way, it's got thorns. So from almost all indications, if you didn't know better, you would think you had a mimosa tree, and if you took this tree and exposed it to freezing temperatures in the winter, something that's fine to do with a mimosa, you'd kill it. This is from the Caribbean. It's from the subtropical areas. It's from islands like Puerto Rico. Needless to say, it can absolutely not tolerate the cold. The reason for this example is to try and make you understand that you have to know exactly what you're dealing with. You can't always go by the appearance of a tree. The best way to do that is to know the dealer that you're doing business with. Make sure it's someone reliable. Make sure it's someone you could call back for information. Now, the reason I'm smiling about that is I got started in business in the early 70s doing flea markets. Nowadays, there are many, many people that are selling bonsai trees at flea markets. I'm sure that most, if not all of them, are very reliable, very dependable people. If you see them at the same location week after week, you might decide that maybe you could take a chance and make a purchase from them. If you're going to do this, make sure that you get a phone number. If they don't have enough interest in the trees they're selling to give you a home phone number or a business number where they could be reached, I would pass and I would try and find another dealer, someone that's a little more accessible. Service in the bonsai business is extremely important. You have to have someone that you could go back to. And it's really important that that person knows as much about the tree as possible. You can always get the best advice from the person that physically potted the tree. They know the conditions it needs, they know the type of soil it's in, and soil mixtures vary greatly. Trees from a temperate climate are a whole nother can of worms. We go back to our Japanese juniper, the one that we were looking at a little earlier when we were talking about watering. A tree like this is native to a climate that gets extremely cold during the winter, well below freezing. While this tree can tolerate freezing during the winter, it doesn't necessarily need freezing. but it does need conditions that are much colder than the average room temperature. The average room temperature being in the 60s during the day, 70s at night. Again, this is during the winter heating season we're talking about. Now, a tree like this can be kept indoors, and the way to do that is to set it up right on a windowsill that doesn't have a radiator directly beneath it. Now, it's extremely important that it be physically on the windowsill, not just near it. If you move this tree 3 or 4 inches away from the windowsill, you're subjecting it to temperature ranges in the 60s at night, in the 70s during the day. You want to keep it much, much cooler than that during the winter months. Trees like this can also be wintered outdoors. They can be put into the ground, pot and all. They can be put into a tool shed. They can be put into a cold frame. Now, these are all a little more advanced methods. They're things that, as you get to know more about bonsai, you'll become more familiar with. The constraints of time really prohibit us from going into this now, especially being that I would like to show you some other types of trees and give you an idea of the types of care that are needed, not only in winter care, but the trimming and the shaping on these trees, and also give you an idea of how they'll do under various environmental conditions. One of the first ones we're going to go to, it just happened to be right near my hand, is a Chinese sweet plum. The botanical name for this is Sagittaria thescens. It's extremely important that you know, again, the type of tree you're dealing with. The reason for that is you want to know what kind of care it's going to need. Now, this type of tree is native to the southern parts of China. The southern parts of China have a climate similar to most parts of Florida in the United States. It's a very warm area, and it really needs to be kept warm during the winter. This type of tree does just terrific indoors, summer and winter. It likes the sunlight, but it will get by with a little less than some of the other subtropical types. Under ideal conditions, where good strong sun and plenty of nourishment are given, the sweet plum will produce little tiny fruits. That's why it's called a sweet plum. They look like little plums. Now, the trimming on a Chinese sweet plum is very, very easy. All you do is take a scissor and trim to shape. You don't have to be very careful about how you trim it. A Chinese sweet plum, where if a leaf is cut, the leaf will survive, even though it's damaged. There are many types of trees that won't take this, but the Chinese sweet plum will. This and many other factors make it one of the better indoor types. It's one of the types that will do best on an indoor environment. Another type that does very well indoors is the Carmona microphylla, also called, the common name for this is Fukian tea. Now, the reason why I'm giving you both names on a lot of these types of trees is that while common names vary from region to region of the country, botanical names are the same throughout the world. Again, this tree is called a Fukian tea, and it's a Carmona microphylla. Carmona microphylla is the name that this will be called whether you're in Japan, China, the United States, Italy, France. It's a Carmona microphylla. The common name varies, not only from country to country, but within the same country. Common names will vary by region. A couple of deciduous trees. Now, deciduous is a name that we haven't mentioned before. Deciduous means trees that lose their leaves in the winter. We have here two types of maple. One is called a trident maple. The other is called a palmatum, or Japanese maple. Now, an easy way to remember this, trident means 3. Tri means 3. It's a reference to the 3 lobes of the leaves. You can see right here, each of these leaves has 3 lobes on it, 3 points, 1, 2, and 3. The palmatum, or Japanese maple, refers to the palm of the hand with the 5 fingers, and you can see there are 5 lobes to these leaves. Now, these are both trees that will lose their leaves in the winter. The Japanese maple goes through a beautiful show of color, just like maple trees do when growing outdoors, and they drop their leaves. We generally don't recommend maple trees for a beginner. It's really a bad idea to start with a deciduous tree. The reason is, no matter how good your intentions are, and we've seen it over the years happen time and time again, the tree drops its leaves, people will think that the tree has died, they'll stop watering it, and it will in fact die. Once the roots totally dry out, then the tree will be dead. Once you've got a couple of trees in your collection, if you're going to water your juniper, you're going to make sure you water your maple. So it's really better to start out with another type of tree. Now, like the sweet plum, the trimming on a maple tree is just leaf by leaf. You trim them off to the shape that you want the tree to have. This is a very, very personal thing. There's really no way to say this tree should be this shape, that tree should be that shape. If you got the exact same tree and gave it to 10 different people, you'd probably get 10 totally different shapes from it. It's like any other art form. It's what you see when you're looking at it. Now, we've had this juniper out twice before. I think it's really important we take it out at least one more time. And the reason for that is with the type of trimming it needs. Now, up until now, we've shown trees that could be trimmed like this. What I've done right here is I've cut through and damaged needles. Now, as you may have remembered with the sweet plum, I said you could cut leaves in half and they'll just continue to grow. With a Japanese juniper or with most evergreen trees, if you damage a needle, the needle will turn brown and will die back totally. This is something that's not terribly harmful to the tree, but it really has an unsightly appearance to it. What you should do with a juniper, and the first thing I'm going to do, is repair this one area. The way I'm going to repair it is by picking off those shoots. Now, let's say we want to lower this area down to bring it in line with the rest of the tree. What you do is hold a branch right below the point that you want to remove, take it in your hands, and just lift. And what happens is it pops right off at a weak point. You're not damaging any needles, you're not cutting any needles, so there'll be no browning up there, and you've accomplished what your goal was. We've brought this part in line with the rest of the tree. So the shaping on a juniper should be done by hand wherever possible. Now, just for a moment, let's assume, we're not going to do it, but let's assume that we wanted to remove this branch. That can't be done by hand. And if we did it with a scissor, we would leave a stumpy scar on it. We'd leave a piece of the branch behind. So what you use in a case of that type of branch removal is something called a concave branch cutter. By taking this tool and putting it on the wood here, this will surround the branch, and when it's closed, it will actually scoop into the wood and remove the entire branch. This is the best and most dependable way to remove a branch of this kind. Now I'd like to discuss some of the best and some of the worst trees that for keeping indoors. We'll start with the worst. These are two of the most traditional, two of the most widely grown, and two of the absolutely worst beginner's trees on the face of the planet Earth. This is a Japanese white pine. This is an Alberta spruce. Both of these are trees that are native to extremely, extremely cold areas. The Alberta spruce is from the northern parts of Canada. It doesn't get too much colder than that. The Japanese white pine is from the mountains of Japan. The mountains of Japan have a winter similar to our Adirondacks. These are extremely, extremely cold areas. Trees like this, brought indoors during the winter for more than a couple of hours at a time, is an absolute death sentence. There is no way that either of these two species can survive indoors during the winter months. If you are going to take a chance with them, you can keep them in a nice sunny environment from maybe April until October. The first time that the heat starts running in the house, they must go outside. Again, they can be placed in a cold frame, they can be placed in pot and all buried in the ground, or they can be put in a garage or a tool shed to get cold. By the way, if you're going to winter them in a dark structure, it's a good idea to leave the trees outdoors, and this applies not only to these two types, but to any temperate climate trees. Leave them outdoors through at least 2 overnight frosts. This way, they're dormant. Once a bonsai tree becomes dormant, and that's accomplished by letting it freeze a couple of times, or at least you know definitely that it's dormant at that point. Once that happens, then the tree is much less dependent on light, and actually the less light it gets, the better, providing it's kept at a very cold temperature. Again, not a thing that's really advisable for beginners, but something that you should know about. From the worst, we go to the best. Now you may look at these 2 bonsai and say, gee, they look like houseplants. Well, there's a good reason for them. While both of these are trees, they are trees that are used very, very often as houseplants and cultivated as houseplants. This is a variegated version of a Benjamin fig, Ficus benjamina, and this is a Schefflera arboricola. These are, again, both used as houseplants. Now, these will survive with very low light conditions. As a matter of fact, the Schefflera is the only type of tree out of over 150 species that we deal with that we will recommend for someone who has absolutely no sunlight whatsoever. This will survive in just diffused room light or indirect sunlight. It'll do very, very well. This is also a tree that can get by with lesser amounts of water. While we don't advocate letting it go for a week, it can get by with less water than most. The Schefflera will develop nice woody multiple trunks, and it does make a very good indoor type of bonsai. In addition to that, we very often get people who want to keep a bonsai in the office. This is probably the most ideal type. Now, keep one thing in mind. When you're making a choice, don't go exclusively by which tree you like the best. Make your environment be a factor. If you pick a tree that you just love the appearance of, but it won't do well in the environment that you have for it, it's not going to last very long. It's going to be dead before you know it. Pick a tree that'll survive in your environment. This is a Chinese banyan tree. This is a tree that's native to the southern part of mainland China and most warm tropical parts of the world. A tree like this in nature will grow a trunk, sometimes 15 or 20 feet across. One of the ways it accomplishes that is by aerial roots. You can see a couple of them hanging down here, at least I hope you could see them. They are produced from the wood on the trunk of the tree and will drop down into the soil, take root, and begin to thicken up. These will multiply and multiply, and the trunk of the tree will eventually fuse together into a very, very thick trunk. Now this is a tree that has a very, very low need for light. It can get by again with drying. Being a ficus, this particular type of banyan will produce figs, and it's a very, very interesting tree and something that will just do beautifully indoors. We've discussed 2 types of trees, temperate and subtropical. There is one other. This is a tropical. It's called a Busita spinosa, or dwarf black olive. Now the difference between a tropical and a subtropical is that subtropical species need a warm environment, but they can tolerate temperatures down to and sometimes slightly below freezing. A sarissa or a sweet plum could take temperatures into the 30s. I've known sarissas to freeze slightly and survive it. They'll drop a lot of leaves, but they will survive. A tropical tree, like the Busita spinosa, should never get below 60 degrees. This is a tree that's native to the southern parts of Europe, southern Spain, southern Italy. Very, very warm climates, almost Caribbean-like. Things that are native to the Caribbean also fall into the tropical areas. Some trees that are native to climates like Hawaii also are tropical. Basically, they're trees that grow in areas where it never gets much below 70 degrees. They can go into the 60s, but once you fall through that, you start having some really, really serious problems. A tree like this, at 50 degrees, would probably die. Once a bonsai enthusiast starts to get a little bit of confidence in themselves and in the tree's ability to survive, one of the next natural progressions is to start making some of your own trees. Now, there are a number of different ways to go in that area. The first is by purchasing finished nursery stock. What this is this is a tree in a plastic nursery pot, very deep. The roots haven't been worked on, but the top of the tree has been styled for quite some time. This particular tree is a Sarissa snow rose. It's a subtropical type, and as you can see, it's been wired and it's been trained. This specific tree is again imported from southern China, and that's where it got its training. I would estimate that it's been trained for about 5 or 6 years to get it to the point where it is right now. Another way to go, and a less expensive way at that, is by buying relatively untrained nursery stock. Now, this is a Carmona microphylla or Fukian tea tree. You can see it already has flowers and berries on it. You can also see that it doesn't have much of a shape to it. In our first and second installments of the Art of Bonsai, we dealt with shaping and potting trees. So I'm not going to go too heavily into that right now. What I am going to do is give you a quick idea of what can be done with a piece of stock like this, and how one should never be afraid to cut, because trimming on a bonsai tree is really, really very, very important. One of the greatest fears that a beginner has is that they're going to cut too much. The reality is that people very rarely cut enough. When you're styling a tree, it's important to look it over, determine where the front will be. It's also not a bad idea to remove it from the nursery container. You can even turn the container upside down. That'll give you a base to work with. At that point, you start looking at it and you say to yourself, what is making this not look like a tree in miniature? Anything that's doing that should be removed. One of the rules that you look for is you don't want branches growing either straight up or straight down. You do want branches that radiate out from the center of the tree. You also don't want branches coming right out in front of you. Now, again, keep in mind, I'm doing a very, very quick job on this. I'm just trying to make you understand that you don't have to be afraid to cut. We went from a very, very wild-looking piece of nursery stock to something in a matter of a minute or so, to something that hopefully more closely resembles a tree. Now, this is by no means finished, but you can see we've taken better than half of what was here away, and now it begins to look like a tree. From this point, it has to be placed into a pot. Again, our episodes 1 and 2 deal more with repotting. We've discussed a number of things that you could do to keep your bonsai tree healthy. We've covered watering, insect control, and we've also covered trimming and general shaping. We've also covered winter care. But one of the things we haven't addressed yet is what kind of condition is your bonsai in at the time of purchase. Unfortunately, nowadays there are a number of bonsai being offered for sale that are far below par. These are trees that are really not in the best of health at time of purchase, and they limit the ability of even a seasoned bonsai enthusiast to have success. Some of the things that you should be aware of: the soil that a bonsai is potted in is extremely important. There are a number of companies in the South that are potting trees in mixtures of peat moss, wood chips, and other things that are just absolutely hostile to a bonsai tree's survival. One of the ways you can recognize these products is they usually come in plastic pots with stones glued to the surface of it. This is to ease in shipping, but has nothing to do with the survival of the tree. There's an old saying in consumerism, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. This is very, very true when it comes to purchasing a bonsai. It's extremely important that the tree be a properly acclimated, properly potted tree at the time of purchase. One of the ways to guarantee this is talk to your friends and neighbors. Find out who's bought a tree and who's been successful with it. By the way, success is never measured in days or weeks. It's measured in months and years. If you know someone who's got a bonsai tree that they've had for a number of years, try and find out where they bought it, make the purchase there. You may go into your local supermarket and see a bonsai tree in a plastic pot with rocks and gravel glued to the surface and a little oriental figurine in it. These trees are generally potted in mixtures of pine bark and wood chips and peat moss, and it's nearly impossible for these trees to survive. Also, the roots on them are generally hacked right off and they're just stuffed into the pot. They're made to sell at a low price. Please don't let price be the primary factor in the bonsai you buy. It's the best way to invite failure. Find a reputable dealer. There are many reputable dealers around. One of the things a reputable dealer will allow you to do is take the tree out of the pot so you can get a feel as to how long it's been potted. When a tree's been potted properly, it'll come out in one piece. The soil ball will be held together by the roots. You put your fingers around the trunk of the tree and the palm of your hand over the soil mass. That'll help hold the top together. Turn the whole thing over and very lightly tap it to free the pot from the soil. By removing the pot, you can determine that this tree has been in here for a number of months at least. The way you determine that is the roots have already began to grow around and the soil stays together in one mass. If you're a little bit leery about doing this, ask the dealer to take the tree out of the pot for you. If they're afraid to do that, there may be a very good reason for it, and it may be a good sign to you that it's a good idea to shop elsewhere. Also, look at the foliage of the tree. Most trees will have a luster to them when they're healthy. It is normal for some trees to have brown in them. This is not a sign of poor health. You can notice this juniper has a lot of brown needles on the inside. This is the way the tree forms. But if you look at the foliage itself, you can see that it's firm and it's healthy and it's resilient. When you brush it, it doesn't break off in your hands. It has a nice spring to it. It just has a good, healthy feel, firm yet healthy. Another and easier way to determine the general condition of the trees at the location that you're planning your purchase is by feeling the soil at the top of the tree. The moss or the soil should feel damp to the touch. If it's dry, this could be a problem. If we were to take this juniper and let it go for 3 or 4 days without water, we could kill the tree. However, if we started watering it properly after that, it might be 3 to 4 weeks before it actually dried up and became brittle. It takes a pretty long time for an evergreen tree to completely die. So make sure that the soil is damp. That's one way of determining that at least the trees are being properly maintained. Also, don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions. Ask names of trees. Ask what kind of conditions they require. Tell the dealer the kind of conditions you have. Listen to the responses you get. They should not only be helpful, but they should be knowledgeable. Too many people selling bonsai trees don't have the first clue as to what kind of care they need. You'd be amazed at some of the stories we hear from our customers. People tell them that trees like this juniper don't need any sunlight, that trees like a Japanese white pine can be kept in the house all winter long. Also, ask if the dealer has a nursery and if they have other material that you could see. Another thing that's extremely important is ask the dealer what kind of instructions they give. This is really critical. There are many, many bonsai dealers that give no instructions at all. Avoid them. That's a very, very difficult thing to successfully raise a bonsai with absolutely no instructions. There are some dealers that give general care instructions. If this is the type of instructions that you're going to receive with the bonsai you purchase, please ask what the specific instructions are. A general sheet is just that. It's a general sheet. You want specifics from the dealer. Again, they should be happy that you're asking questions that are going to help the bonsai survive. There are some dealers that will give you instructions specifically for the tree you're purchasing. In that case, follow them. This is important. If you're getting detailed, specific instructions, follow them. Even if they don't seem right, follow them anyway. You have to go under the assumption that the person that you're purchasing from knows more about the tree than you do. So follow the instructions that you get. Another way to increase your chances of success is buy a book. There are many, many good books available on bonsai culture. We're currently stocking over 75 titles. These books are well illustrated. They usually have sections on many, many different topics, and they all deal with problems that most beginners encounter. So take advantage of the experience of the author, buy a book, and try and learn a little more about general bonsai culture. Also, when you're at a dealer's store, ask if they have a nursery. Many, many bonsai dealers do have trees other than what are on display in their showrooms. By seeing their entire stock, you can not only get an idea of how serious they are about their business, but you can also see how the material is kept when it's not in the store on view. What we're going to do right now is we're going to take you over to our nursery and show you some of our other material. This is our yard area. It receives about 5 to 6 hours a day of direct sun. The watering is done by overhead sprinklers. They're all controlled by computers. During the summertime, spring to fall, we keep between 1,000 and 1,500 pieces of material in this area. During the winter months, all of the potted trees are brought into our greenhouse right in the back there. This is the roof area of our nursery. The reason we wanted to show you this is because very often people are afraid to put their bonsai out in the sunlight. Trees in this area receive direct sun from the minute it comes up in the morning until it goes down in the evening. The watering, as you may notice, is all done by computer and by sprinklers. The trees during the heat of the summer are watered 4 times a day in this area. During the periods of spring to fall, we keep a couple of thousand pieces of material up on the roof. During the winter months, all the potted bonsai are brought to the greenhouse, and all of the nursery stock remains here. They remain out through the full brunt of the winter, and we have very, very little losses. Normally this area has quite a bit more material than is here now, but in anticipation of the change of seasons, we began to bring all of our subtropical trees indoors. The shooting time right now is late September, and about a quarter of the material has been removed from this roof area. This is our greenhouse. From spring to fall, it's empty. At this time of the year, we've begun over the last couple of weeks to bring some of the subtropical material back in anticipation of the weather change. You've got some Scheffeleras, you have some Sarissas, both with pink and white flowers. There's some other types of Sarissa. We've got some black olives here. A lot of different subtropical types. These are the sweet plums. Here's a real cutie. Calamundan orange. These have white flowers that are so fragrant that you just can't believe it. Here's an example. We were talking earlier about nursery stock and potted trees. This is a dwarf black olive that's in trained nursery stock that's still unfinished. Here's the same type of tree after it's done and potted. In addition to all of this, we have our customer section. This area right here is all trees that belong to people who either are on vacation or are having problems with their trees. It's very, very important when you make a purchase, find out if the dealer is going to be able to help you if you run into a problem. Also find out if they'll be able to watch your trees for you when you go away on vacation. This is extremely important because when people leave their bonsai with friends and neighbors, it always leads to trouble. I hope you've enjoyed the last hour as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. On behalf of Bonsai of Brooklyn, I'd like to thank you for spending that time with us. I hope you've gotten some good tips and information, and I hope that this information can help you to greater success in enjoying the art of bonsai, something that I've found to be a great, great pleasure for the last 25 years. This is Paul Greviano on behalf of Bonsai of Brooklyn, saying thank you and good night.